So I want you to think about your week for a second. Do you ever get that feeling where you're just waking up, scrolling on your phone, doing your work, scrolling some more, and then just repeating the whole cycle?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is the classic autopilot mode. It's like you're watching yourself go through the motions.
Right, exactly. Well, there's a statistic in the material we're looking at today that honestly blew my mind.
Yeah.
By the time you hit age 35, 95% of your thoughts, your behaviors, your emotional reactions, all of it is just unconscious habit.
95%. That's massive.
It's wild. You essentially become this creature of pure routine. You think you're making choices, but mostly you're just running on a biological script.
And that completely recontextualizes that stuck feeling, We think of our daily routines as active decisions, but neurologically, you're just operating from this archive of past firing patterns.
Yeah, the script is basically holding the steering wheel. And that staggering reality is the anchor for our deep dive today.
I'm really excited for this one.
Same. And the source material we're pulling from to unpack this is, well, it's actually an English learning audio program.
Which I know sounds like a genuinely weird place to find high-level neuroscience.
Right. But it's actually brilliant because this audio transcript, it uses the process of learning a language as a sort of Trojan horse to deliver this incredible masterclass on neuroplasticity.
It really is a great framework because learning a language, it's basically the ultimate neuroplasticity workout.
Exactly. So our mission today is to extract the science of how to rewire your brain, how to break free from that 95% autopilot. And we'll also look at some of the clever English idioms the source uses to explain these concepts.
Yeah, I love how they map the vocabulary onto the biology.
Totally. So let's start with this huge myth that the source busts right out of the gate. This idea that the brain is this hardwired, rigid machine.
Right, the whole you get what you're born with concept.
Yeah, like you're just programmed at birth and that's it. The source pushes back hard on that and uses this analogy of a living garden.
I really like that visual.
Me too. But I want to push past just the metaphor for a second. If we aren't this rigid machine, what is actually happening physically inside our heads when we try to learn something new? Like, what is the living garden actually doing?
Right. So to get away from the cliche that the brain is just, flexible, we have to look at the cellular level.
Yeah.
When we talk about neuroplasticity, we are talking about synapses.
Okay, the gaps between the neurons.
Exactly, the junctions. So when you have a novel thought, or say you try to pronounce a new vocabulary word in English, you trigger a temporary chemical change at that junction.
Just a temporary one at first.
Yeah, just a spark. And if you don't repeat the action, that chemical signal just dissipates. It fades away.
But if you do repeat it,
well, if you keep firing that specific sequence, your brain responds by making a permanent structural change. I mean, it physically grows new dendritic spines to bridge the gap.
Wait, really? So it's not just like a software update. I'm literally adding new physical hardware to my brain.
Yes, exactly. That is the literal biological reality of the living garden. Every single action forces a microadaptation. Your brain is just relentlessly sculpting itself based on whatever you're demanding of it.
Okay, but that brings up what I think is the biggest roadblock for most of us.
Yeah.
Because if adding new hardware just requires us to take action, why do we feel so incredibly stuck all the time?
The motivation trap.
Yes. We sit around on autopilot and we just wait to feel motivated before we try to change anything. I mean, how often have you delayed a goal because you just weren't feeling it?
Oh, constantly. It's the most common excuse.
Right. But the source hits us with this hard truth. Waiting to feel motivated is a complete trap. Action actually has to come first.
Which is completely backwards to how most of us live, but it aligns perfectly with how our dopamine system works.
Okay, I want to dig into that. Because I always thought dopamine was just a reward. Like, you eat a slice of cake, you get dopamine. You finish a hard workout, you get dopamine.
Yeah, it's widely misunderstood as just a pleasure chemical, but it's actually primarily a molecule of anticipation. It's about motivation. It drives seeking behavior.
So how does that work if I have zero energy to start something?
Well, when you take a small physical action, even if you have to literally force yourself to do it, you create what neuroscientists call a reward prediction error.
A reward prediction error.
Right. You take a step, your brain registers that deliberate movement, and it releases a small pulse of dopamine to say, hey, this must be important, let's mark this.
Oh, wow. So the brain notices you doing it and rewires to support it.
Exactly. And that dopamine lowers the electrical threshold for action the next time you try to do it. It literally makes it easier to start next time.
So to map this onto one of the English idioms the source highlights, They talk about how you have to flip the switch when you have no energy.
Mm.
And they use this campfire analogy.
The campfire one is great.
Yeah, it really clicked for me. You don't sit around a pile of cold wood waiting to feel the warmth before you strike the match. You strike the match first, and that creates the heat.
Right, you don't wait for the fire to just spontaneously happen.
Exactly. So chemically speaking, striking the match is that initial forced action, and the heat is that dopamine release that follows.
That maps perfectly. So say you're trying to learn English and you have zero motivation to study. If you just speak one idiom out loud, you engage your motor cortex.
Just by physically saying it.
Yeah, and your auditory processing centers hear it. Your brain detects that synchronized activity, registers it as a deliberate use of energy, and boom, it releases dopamine to reinforce the circuit.
You chemically manufacture your own motivation.
Exactly. You act your way into the mood.
Okay, I love that. So you strike the match, you force the action, you get the dopamine. But I mean, a single match isn't going to keep a fire burning all night. How do we take that spark and turn it into a lasting habit?
This naturally leads into this foundational phrase from neuroscience: neurons that fire together wire together.
Right, Hebb's postulate.
Yes. So whenever you repeat a behavior, the brain tries to make that pathway more efficient. Now, we always hear the train tracks analogy with habits.
Like laying down tracks.
Right. But it's actually much more accurate to think of it like water carving a canyon.
Ooh, I like that. Break down the canyon for me.
So a single drop of water rolling down a dirt hill, it doesn't do much, right?
No, barely leaves a mark.
But if thousands of gallons flow down that exact same route over and over, they erode the soil, they hit the bedrock, and eventually they carve out a really deep gorge.
Makes sense.
Well, in the brain, that water is electrical activity. As you repeatedly fire a specific circuit like brushing your teeth or practicing a new word, a certain type of cell starts wrapping those specific neurons in this fatty substance called myelin.
Myelin. Okay, so that's basically the insulation, right? Like the rubber coating around a copper wire.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But it doesn't just protect the wire, it radically accelerates the speed of the electrical signal.
How much faster are we talking?
A fully myelinated neural pathway can transmit signals up to 100 times faster than an unmyelinated one.
100 times. That's insane.
Right. And once that deep canyon had been carved, that behavior becomes the absolute path of least resistance. The brain just automatically takes that route.
Wow. And that's how it gets absorbed into that 95% autopilot script. Even just 5 minutes a day of a habit starts installing that new mental software.
Exactly.
But this makes the concept of focus feel incredibly high stakes. The source material uses the words intentional and clutter to describe attention. It says focus is a spotlight.
Which is a very accurate way to look at it biologically.
Right. So if our focus is a spotlight and it determines where that water flows and where that myelin gets wrapped, aren't most of us just intentionally pointing it at clutter all day long?
Oh, absolutely.
Like if I'm jumping from a spreadsheet to a text message to scrolling a news feed, what am I actually doing to my brain's architecture?
You are carving dozens of really shallow, chaotic pathways.
Yikes.
Yeah. When your attention is constantly divided like that, the electrical firing is scattered, the brain never gets a strong, isolated signal, so it doesn't bother deploying the resources to deeply myelinate anything.
So I'm basically wiring myself to be incapable of deep work.
Unfortunately, yes. You are actively conditioning your brain to expect novel, highly variable, low-effort stimuli. Deep focus sends the signal. This is important. Let's build more of this. If you don't focus deeply, the brain struggles to figure out what matters.
Okay, it's slightly terrifying to think about attention as a literal construction crew I'm directing. If I spend 3 hours doom scrolling, I'm physically reinforcing the circuitry for scattered attention.
You are building a canyon for clutter.
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about physical actions and mental focus. But what about the internal stuff? Because the source makes a really compelling case that habits aren't just things we do physically, they're things we feel.
Oh, this is such an important point. Emotions act as the glue for memory and identity.
Yeah, and the progression outlined in the source is kind of terrifying. It walks through how a single emotional response snowballs.
Right, because humans have these highly developed frontal lobes. We don't just react to a physical threat like a tiger in the room. We react to a memory of an argument or the anticipation of a stressful email.
Exactly. So say you feel a flash of frustration. If you just keep replaying the event that caused it in your head, you sustain that chemical release, It stops being just a fleeting
It
emotion,
becomes a mood.
right? And if that mood lasts for weeks, what happens?
The brain looks for efficiency again. It deepens into a temperament.
And if you carry that temperament for years,
It actually structurally alters the brain to the point where it becomes a fixed personality trait. You become the anxious one or the bitter one.
wait, so stress and anxiety aren't just things that happen to you. They are things your brain is actively practicing.
Yes. That is the dark side of neuroplasticity. If you practice anxiety every day, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, it actually grows in physical size.
Are you serious? It physically gets bigger.
It does, and it becomes hyper-reactive. You're basically carving a massive, heavily myelinated canyon straight to a panic response, so then a tiny trigger happens, and you don't even have to think about it. The emotion fires automatically.
Okay, so how do we stop that? If the canyon is already carved, how do I intercept that process? The audio program uses this great phrase, emotional refractory period.
Yes, the refractory period. This is the key. It's the gap of time between the initial trigger and your nervous system returning to baseline.
Because you can't stop that first reaction, right?
Yeah.
If someone cuts me off in traffic, I'm going to feel that spike of anger.
Exactly. You can't stop the initial adrenaline. The intervention happens entirely in the recovery time. The goal is to consciously shorten that refractory period.
The idiom they use in the curriculum is stewing in it, which is such a perfect way to describe overthinking and ruminating.
It really is.
So shortening the period means noticing when you're stewing in it and intentionally interrupting that pattern so you cut off the chemical supply.
Yes. Every time you cut that rumination short, you deprive that neural circuit of the repeated firing it needs. If you stop sending water down the canyon, eventually the pathway weakens.
That makes total sense. And it really shifts how we should look at stress. We always treat stress like this ultimate villain we have to avoid, but the material redefines it.
Right, stress itself isn't the villain. Short-term controlled stress is actually a gym for your nervous system.
Like the fireplace metaphor they use.
Exactly. Stress is like fire in a fireplace. If it's contained, like taking a cold shower or trying to hold a conversation in a new language, it warms the home. It signals the brain to adapt.
But if it's uncontrolled, chronic stress.
Without rest, it burns the house down.
Wow. Okay, so brief stress is actually good for neuroplasticity.
Very good. It triggers the release of something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which basically acts like fertilizer for the brain, promoting the growth of new synapses.
But only if we rest afterwards. Which brings us to the ultimate rewiring tool mentioned in the source material. And honestly, it's the most underrated one.
Sleep.
Yes, sleep. Because you can take action, you can focus your spotlight, you can use healthy stress. But none of this wiring actually sets without sleep.
That's the great paradox here. You stimulate the change during the day, but you consolidate it at night. Sleep isn't a luxury. It is a biological necessity for transformation.
The source material says that taking action without sleeping is like planting a living garden and then never watering it. Nothing takes fruit.
Because deep sleep is basically a construction crew for your brain.
I love the vocabulary they use here. They talk about how real transformation happens under the covers and use the term prune away. Walk me through what the construction crew is actually doing under the covers.
So when you enter deep, slow-wave sleep, your brain essentially hits replay. It takes the specific circuits you fired repeatedly during the day, say, that new English idiom you were practicing, and it fires them again.
But faster, right?
Yes, sometimes at 10 to 20 times the speed.
Great. My brain is fast-forwarding through my study session
Yeah.
while I'm completely unconscious.
Yes. And this rapid replay is what physically transfers the information into long-term storage. And while it's doing that, it's also engaged in synaptic pruning.
Pruning away the clutter.
Exactly. It chemically dismantles the connections that didn't matter that day to free up resources. It strengthens the canyons you want and collapses the ones you don't.
That completely destroys the whole hustle culture mentality for me. You know, the idea that we have to grind and sacrifice sleep to get ahead.
It's so counterproductive.
Right. Because if the goal is to rewire the brain, sleep is the moment we actually lock in that new identity. We try to grind our way to success. But like the source says, the real transformation happens when you're off the clock.
If you skip the sleep, you skip the exact phase where the cement dries. The effort is largely wasted. You really do need that deep, uninterrupted rest. Short naps help, but they aren't enough for the heavy construction.
It's just incredible how brilliantly this curriculum merges language learning with neuroscience. I mean, they use these vivid idioms like flip the switch and prune away and stewing in it.
Mm.
But the language itself is perfectly describing the literal biological reality of a changing brain.
It forces you to engage with the architecture of your own mind. It takes this abstract idea of changing your habits and turns it into a very concrete biological protocol.
So to bring everything together for you listening,
Yeah.
you are not a prisoner of your past patterns.
Yeah.
You are the architect of your future ones.
Absolutely.
You just have to understand how to build them. You have to take action before motivation strikes to get that dopamine. You have to treat your focus like a spotlight so you don't build canyons for clutter. You have to aggressively shorten your emotional refractory periods, and you have to honor your sleep.
The 95% script isn't permanent.
Exactly. Neuroplasticity isn't just something that happens to you. It's a mechanism that you direct. So as you go about the rest of your day, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to mull over.
I love this question.
If your brain is silently building train tracks right this very second, based on whatever you focus on deeply and repeatedly, what are you unknowingly wiring your brain to be an expert at today?